Hey y'all, and welcome back to DRMS's podcast, Don't Get Me Started, where we cover the myriad of issues, concerns, and obstacles faced by Mississippians with disabilities. And since we're still the new kids on the block, Disability Rights Mississippi, or DRMS as I've previously called it, is the designated protection and advocacy agency for the state of Mississippi. And for more information on that, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to episode 1 where we had our executive director as a guest, and she explained what the P&A does and what Disability Rights Mississippi does in the state of Mississippi. We tend to sling around a lot of abbreviations and acronyms, so I hope that you'll go back and check that out so you get a little bit better understanding of what the P&A does and what we do here at DRMS. So since I haven't been kicked off this podcast yet and my microphone taken away, I'm Greta Martin. I'm the litigation director here at Disability Rights Mississippi. And today we're going to turn our focus to an area of work and a project that DRMS has aligned as a priority for the last 2 years. It's a project that's near and dear to my heart, as well as near and dear to the heart of my guest today. And I want to introduce my guest. Her name is Kendra Martin. She is a legal fellow here at Disability Rights Mississippi, and her concentration has been on prison rights and prison reform for the last year and a half. Thank you, Kendra, for being here today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And just before we get started, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your background, just a very brief little introduction of who you are.
My name is Kendra Martin. I am originally from Jackson. I lived in Dallas, Texas for about 3 years, and then I came back here in 2013 for law school, and I've been here ever since.
Awesome. And you've been our boots on the ground, passionate monitor of the Mississippi Department of Corrections facilities for over a year now. And can you just give us, very briefly, we have concentrated on all of the MDOC facilities, but basically, we've stuck with the top, what I call the big 3. Can you identify for everyone just what those, I know we're going to maybe say that. I want people to know which facilities we're talking about.
So, Mississippi State Penitentiary, that will be Parchman. There is Central Mississippi Correctional Facility, that's CMCF. And then there is South Mississippi Correctional Institute, and that will be SMCI. Those are the large 3 MDOC facilities.
Okay, and you've been to other MDOC facilities as well, but those, as I mentioned before, are the top 3 that we've really concentrated our monitoring efforts over the past year to year and a half.
That's correct.
Okay, and I know this is a really tough, heavy topic. MDOC has a very notorious history that's littered with a lot of death, a lot of inhumane, severe conditions, a lot of abuse and neglect, a lot of understaffing with very little response or assistance from our state leadership. So I know this is a heavy topic, and we really appreciate the work you do and continue to do, because it's not easy. But before we jump specifically into your prison work and specifically the report that you have helped DRMS author, I want to talk about how we got started with this project and why DRMS has the authority to go into facilities like this. And so feel free to jump in whenever you'd like, but I just wanted to give a brief overview. A lot of times in the legal world, I as an attorney, you as a legal fellow, we hear this, well, where do you guys get the right to come into these facilities and do what you do? And so I just want to rewind back to episode 1, where our executive director discussed DRMS as a designated P&A for the state of Mississippi, and our access authority being codified through Congress, through PAD, PAMI, and PAYER. She went through all of that alphabet soup, I like to call it, in the first episode. But as a designated P&A and pursuant to the duties outlined in PAD, PAMI, and PAYER, we have the federal authority to monitor prisons for compliance with the laws concerning conditions, prisoners' rights, and to conduct investigations of any potential abuse and neglect. And this is a very unique authority. As you know, we get a lot of pushback on this, but ultimately case law and precedence is on our side. So we have authority which extends not only to the facility, but to the incarcerated individuals as well as any of their records, including medical records. And unfortunately, we've seen in Mississippi, prisons have become the de facto treatment facility for individuals with mental illness and other various disabilities. And P&As across the country have tackled problems like this. They've handled things like police misconduct, ADA violations at every stage of incarceration, mental health treatment, or as we see here in Mississippi, the lack thereof. And that's just to name a few. But I really think to understand why Disability Rights Mississippi pushed the gas pedal on our prison work, we have to backtrack to 2019. I know that's hard for a lot of us to think about pre-COVID, pre-pandemic life, but well before COVID and masks and social distancing were having their moments, MDOC was having theirs. And what we saw at the end of 2019 into 2020 were inmate deaths coming in at almost a daily rate without any explanation under very suspicious circumstances. That trend ramped up well into 2020, and it was almost like the horrible little secret of MDOC was now being shoved into a national spotlight. It got a lot of attention on the state level. It got a lot of attention on the national level. Videos from the facilities were being released to MSNBC, CNN. Things that we in the advocacy community knew about for years were now being thrust into the spotlight because of this escalating trend of suspicious deaths, violence, and finally seeing, videos and pictures of these horrendous conditions that these people were living in. And, we could spend hours talking about those incidents that occurred. But just to summarize, the Clarion Ledger released an article recently in January 2021 that kind of gave an overview of the alarming results of 2020. And that was that the number of people who died in MDOC custody reached triple digits by the end of 2020. And that was a reported 102 deaths with little to no explanation. Not even sure how many of those could be attributed to COVID versus just living in the environment they live in. And to know, and just to really bring this to light, this comes on the heels of Mississippi historically having the highest prisoner mortality rate. And also having more people incarcerated per capita than all but 2 states. So just a lot of alarming numbers coming out of Mississippi in the last 2 years with little to no explanation and very little to no response from MDOC officials and, more importantly, state leaders. So, and if you take a look at MDOC's press releases just since January 1st, 2021, they're already on track to have another big year. I mean, we're looking at 8 deaths since January 1, none of which have been given a cause or reason. And I would be safe to assume that the families of these prisoners don't know either. Just a lot of behind the shade veil of what's going on at these facilities and how these individuals are ending up dead. But this escalating and disturbing trend of inhumane conditions and abuse and neglect is all mashed up with this escalating violence that's happened due to understaffing. All that started in 2019 and continued into 2020, and you throw COVID in the mix and it's just pandemonium. And MDOC has done its best to really keep people's suspicions down during COVID. COVID has been thrust into the spotlight, so all of the issues we had at the beginning of 2020 have kind of been shoved to the back burner because Mississippi, like the entire country, has been struggling through this pandemic, and that has become the top priority and really pushed aside some major issues that are still present today in Mississippi correctional facilities. So, as stated in the Clarion Ledger article that I just referenced and in the public report that we're about to discuss, being sent to a Mississippi prison is basically the equivalent of getting a death sentence. No matter your crime, no matter your charge, no matter, your mental health, no matter your physical health, it is a death sentence. And we have seen time and time again clients and families that have come to us, and we've seen that play out with individuals who are incarcerated here. So, with that very quick little overview and background on how we got here, I want to open up some discussion with you, Kendra. Recently, Disability Rights Mississippi issued a report entitled Cruel and Unusual Punishment in Mississippi Prisons, A Tale of Abuse, Discrimination, and Undue Death Sentences. And that's been disseminated to state leadership, key members of the Mississippi legislature, and many others. And this report encompasses your on-site firsthand monitoring and all the data that you collected. So while we may jump around a bit, I just want to get started with talking about you first went into the Mississippi Department of Correction Facilities on behalf of DRMS around the beginning of 2020. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So if you just could walk me through that. Walk me through your first initial reaction to the facilities. If you want to talk about specific facilities, that's fine. But just, you really walked into those facilities at the height of this escalating and disturbing trend. So what were your observations?
Well, initially it was like pulling teeth to get in. We kept getting a lot of pushback. As you recall, they didn't want to let us in. Every time we were scheduled to go, they would say, oh, well, something's happened, we can't go. That might have happened maybe twice, I think. But once we initially got in, things were still horrid. It was a culture shock. Like, it's bad, but to actually see it, the filth, to see the offenders who were physically handicapped, you can see those. It was shocking to see people living like that. While I know it is a correctional facility, they are doing time for their crimes. However, just the level of disregard for these humans was baffling to me, to say the least. And that would have to be my initial response. It was a shock. Because you hear it, people will tell you, but until you get in there and see it one-on-one, there was water all over the floor from sewage. There were things falling from the ceiling. We saw bugs. We saw, it was terrible. We saw plates that I wouldn't feed to my dog. It was a lot. It was a lot.
And just to kind of touch back on our access authority and how this plays into what you've been doing in the facilities, DRMS as the P&A under these authoritative statutes that we've discussed before, we have access to things that you wouldn't normally get to see, that truly only incarcerated individuals and prison staff and administration see. You've had access to bathroom facilities, residential facilities, medical facilities, any place where the inmates are allowed to go, we have access to, just to determine, if it's okay and if it is okay for residents. So just tell me a little bit about what you're seeing with regards to some of our inmates with disabilities.
Oh, well, I saw so many wheelchairs and walkers and shower chairs that, and depending on the zone, if you go into what's considered an open bay, there's like one large room and it's like bunk beds, maybe not even 3 feet apart. You would see wheelchairs, just typically squeezed in between the bed. I mean, it was no walking space. You would see, architectural barriers. Walking into the bathroom, there's like a hump, like before you can get into the shower. There were just so many issues that I saw just for people who have those physical disabilities. And so, that's something that definitely worried me. And it should be fixed immediately.
And what were you hearing from, in general, the people that you spoke with when you were on the zones, and also our clients who we have taken on as individual cases? What are you hearing with regard to medical care?
Oh, it doesn't exist. And also they're required to pay $6 every time they do a medical request. It's called a sick call. It's $6. They pay it in hopes that they will get seen. It's not even a guarantee that they would still be pulled to go and receive medical care. So like I said, it doesn't exist. They may see you, I guess, if you're near death. However, there's so many sick calls that go unanswered. There's so many people in those facilities who are not getting what they need. They truly have debilitating illnesses. It's sickening.
Mm-hmm. And, I know you and I have talked about this before, and we've talked about this with other organizations about how we understand the stigma that is involved with working with incarcerated individuals. And we understand that, we as individuals may have issues with the justice system and how those things play out, but we understand that when someone's incarcerated, they're there for a reason and to serve time. And so obviously what we are looking for is not the Ritz-Carlton. This is we're looking for basic humanity, basic human needs that need to be met, and that's food and water and medical care. And you're just seeing a lack of that across the board.
Yes, a lack of everything. And once you become incarcerated, you're pretty much a warden of the state. So the state has pretty much assumed your care, and the state, simply put, is just not meeting. They're not meeting their requirement. They're failing them.
Right. So you, like I said, came in at the beginning of 2020, right at the height of when we were hearing daily reports of deaths. We were hearing escalating reports of violence within the facilities that truly can be directly linked to understaffing. But then COVID hit.
Yes.
And much like the rest of the country and other organizations, Disability Rights Mississippi was not immune to having to delay our work and slow our work, especially in facilities, including correctional facilities. So tell me a little bit about your monitoring during and since the start of the pandemic.
Well, it has been slow, I will say that. Whereas let me rephrase. We always have the authority to go anywhere on the zone or in the facility. With COVID, it was pretty much, hey, well, we can't go to that building. They're quarantining. So there were a lot of parts of the buildings we weren't able to access simply because they had outbreaks. Mm-hmm. While we were still able to monitor some buildings, it was definitely still risky. There were, a lot of sick offenders. There were offenders advising that they felt like they had COVID. They weren't being tested. They were sick, or somebody on the zone was sick, or while they were quoting that they weren't transferring, there were still transferred inmates coming in. So there were people coming from different facilities on the zone with them, and the inmates were offended and upset because, it's COVID. And so they were like, hey, they're still bringing people here. I truly believe that they did not handle COVID like they should from the beginning. And, the result of that has been a lot of sick offenders, a lot of deaths, so to speak. And, just illnesses that are related to that. Right. If you already have, underlying health conditions, COVID is going to make it 10 times worse.
Yeah. So. Just a stark contrast to what we're seeing. DRMS does some very extensive work in our mental health facilities across the state, such as, Mississippi State Hospital and places like that, where DRMS's monitoring team saw a lot of significant safety precautions put in place in those facilities. We just saw a complete and utter lack of that in MDOC facilities. And I want to bring up, first, have you been into the facilities since the start of the pandemic around March and April?
I have been into the facilities since then.
So, we saw the press release that was put out by Commissioner Burl Cain and MDOC on January 20th, 2021, that wanted to and made an effort to highlight MDOC's sanitation efforts in Mississippi prisons. And part of that press release, Commissioner Cain and MDOC outlined these comprehensive and aggressive sanitizing measures. That's a direct quote. And they outlined 14 different measures that they allege they put into place. In our monitoring during the time of COVID and in our discussions with our clients who are living in these facilities, what is your take about the accuracy of this press release?
It's very inaccurate. While there are some things that I can attest to, they do have where they're not allowing visitors. That's true. As far as prisoner movements, that is true to a certain extent as well. But I feel like it's being used against the offender. So it's being used in this aspect. If an offender needs to go to a specialist for a medical issue, they'll say, hey, well, we're suspending our prisoner movement. So at this time, you're not going to be able to go to your specialist appointment for cancer. We'll reschedule it. So in that regard, I will say they may be doing some of that, but then sometimes they're still moving inmates around. So number 3, disinfected with electrostatic sanitizing sprayers. That is accurate. A lot of my offenders have called and saying, hey, well, they gave us these sprayers, but they're empty. They put all sprayers in all zones, but no hand sanitizer. I've had reports that they've been empty for a month now. Even before it got to a month, well, hey, they didn't put anything in there. So, wow, it's a step forward. I mean, is it really doing anything if there's no sanitizer in there? I've not saw any ultraviolet sterilization lights anywhere. As far as number 5, the portable UV sterilizers, wand UV sterilizer, that's inaccurate. Air purifiers, inaccurate. Walk-through sanitation stations, inaccurate. They have some spray that if you elect to grab when you're going on the zone, you can. But it's supposed to be for officers. Inmates are not allowed to touch the spray bottle for officers. There are some offenders that I have saw with masks. They're state-made masks. I don't know that number is accurate, but there are some offenders who don't have masks. We have had to give them masks. Social distancing is a no. They're all still packed on the zone together. They've not changed any way that the housing units are laid out. People are still in very close proximity with one another. And so that's inaccurate to my knowledge. They are testing correctional officers, but like workers and any inmates, to my knowledge, they're not getting tested either.
Gotcha. And an interesting thing that when I saw this press release, which was released on MDOC's website, this was dated January 20th, 2021. So it just calls into play when those measures even came into existence. The ones that do, right. Correct. I mean, we have been now dealing with this pandemic since early 2020, understanding that Commissioner Kane did not step into his position until June of 2020 or a little before that. But just wondering now why almost a year later you are touting these great sanitation efforts is in my opinion very suspicious. Anyway, so I want to turn to your report because we are here to talk about that, and this is a very well written report. And just talk about a couple of the specific observations. Obviously, DRMS is concerned about this situation as a whole, but 2 of the issues that we are specifically concerned about is mental health care and ADA accessibility issues. And so on page 6 of your report, you discuss that many of our offender clients have reported that they are only prescribed medications on an as-needed basis, and that includes mental health type prescriptions, which, many of us know need to be taken regularly to be effective. They're not allowed to keep those medications on their person. And, of course, the report details throughout how inconsistent pill call, which is when they get their regular medications, is. And I think another thing to note is we've had a lot of offender clients report that sick call and pill call, which is like you mentioned, their regular medical calls or their regular medication calls, those tend to completely stop if there's ever some kind of lockdown situation or security issue within the facility. So, there are lots of ways that those can be delayed. But the report also says that the only contact that offenders have reported having a mental health professional is when they are exhibiting suicidal ideations or actions.
That's correct.
Okay. So from your experience and your discussions with our clients and just your general observations, what would you say is the level of mental health care that offenders are receiving in MDOC facilities?
Oh, wow. It's I won't say zero because they do have a psychiatrist they're paying. I won't say what for, but they do have one. But it would have to be a level 1. Very basic, very elementary, very just put a Band-Aid on it. And everybody knows Band-Aids don't work for mental health. Is medication, is therapy, and the things that they are doing is playing patchwork. Like, to see the psychiatrist, the inmates have blatantly said to me that they have to fake that they're having suicidal ideations. That's how they have to get to the psychiatrist. They can't say, oh, I'm really depressed today, I'm thinking bad thoughts, can I see someone? Because that's not effective enough. Mm-hmm. What they have to do is say, hey, I'm about to kill myself, or, act like they are, to get some type of mental health treatment from the psychiatrist.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but we've heard time and time again from our clients that go into the correctional facilities with mental health diagnoses from a doctor in the past. They're on consistent medication, that they see an abrupt halt to their treatment, and no consistent replacement for treatment. You have two kinds of offenders. You have those offenders that come into the facilities with diagnosed mental health issues who are taking medication or have taken medication, but then you have those offenders who come into the facilities with undiagnosed mental health issues that should be identified. And if we're going to use prisons as a mental health treatment facility, then we need to provide some type of treatment, right? So I know we have seen both of those kinds of clients. And so what you're hearing is that this basic level of mental health care, when they get it, when it's asked for, they essentially have to fake symptoms to even get in with the psychiatrist.
That's correct. They don't have the privileges that we have, where you can just say, oh, I'm just not feeling myself, I'm very sad, I cry a lot, I'm having negative thoughts, or I just, I'm very depressed. That won't do anything for them, unfortunately. And I really like what you said about the two kinds of offenders, because one, like you said, you have those ones who have a pre-existing issue before they're even incarcerated. And then the second kind, I would have to say, will be the ones who don't have one but end up having it once they get there.
Right. Yeah.
Due to just the severity of the situation, they're lacking in every basic fundamental way, and it's sickening.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, another observation I just wanted to touch on, because it falls directly into much of DRMS's civil rights work, and that's on page 7. You describe that MDOC continues to discriminate against offenders with disabilities in many ways, including failing to remove architectural barriers, failing to provide even reasonable modifications in policies and procedures, failing to provide auxiliary aids and services necessary for effective communications, and improper segregation, among other things. So obviously one of the things that we look for when we go in for monitoring is accessibility to both physical accessibility to programs and services, which I guess is a whole other issue we'll have to do another day, the lack of services and programs in MDOC facilities. But talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing with our clients who have physical limitations that require walkers, wheelchairs, prosthetics. So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing as far as their lack of access.
Well, there are so many barriers in the bathroom. That's the first thing. As far as when you walk into the shower, there's a hump. It's hard for offenders who are physically handicapped to get the wheelchair over the hump. And then there's also the issue of offenders with, mobility impairments not having access to walkers. There are so many people who limp around. They need walkers. They need wheelchairs. They need shower chairs. Those aren't privileges. That they need that stuff. They're not getting it. We've saw where offenders have like a walker, but the leg or the foot or something is broken, so they have to kind of put like a tennis ball under it. I've had a client who's been asking for a new walker probably since last year, and he still hasn't gotten it. Like, it's beyond the point of a repair. He can't get one. There are issues with no handrails as far as in the shower. There are no accessible bathrooms or toilets for offenders who are physically handicapped. They may have one, but one is not enough for a zone that has over 100 offenders. And so we're seeing lack of handrails. We're seeing barriers to and from the shower. We're seeing the lack of non-slip flooring. So more. Off the top of my head, that's what I do know. There's the issue of mold as well, that is beyond repair in the bathrooms. And that's about all I can think of at this time.
Yeah. Well, your report covers a lot, and it's very well researched and very well put together. And so I would absolutely encourage everyone to read your report, which is available on DRMS's website and has also been shared on social media. It's gotten a lot of really great coverage. But, just as we move into wrapping things up, this has clearly been an escalation over the last 2 years, and we have escalated to no resolution. MDOC has been the subject of numerous investigative articles and reporting, both on the state and national level. Over a year ago, DRMS was one of several organizations that joined Representative Benny Thompson in filing a complaint with the DOJ, who in turn opened an investigation pursuant to the Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act. To date, I don't believe there has been any resolution or information provided about that investigation or what DOJ has found and what their suggestions might be. DRMS and I'm sure other organizations have been reporting findings and have been advocating for months and reporting these things to MDOC officials. And state leadership, including Governor Tate Reeves, has promised improvement and correction. And then he literally vetoed the only effort that I have seen made over the last year coming from the legislature. We've had celebrities come in and file lawsuits. That's really only resulted in MDOC's medical provider, Centurion, jumping ship. They're out. They've recently brought on a new medical provider, Vital Core. We've yet to see what Vital Core is going to bring to the table as far as improved medical and mental health care.
It's not going well. I'm getting reports already.
I'm sure.
They're actually requesting for Centurion back. That will just give you a general idea of how.
There we go. So now we got this report. And we've given this to put this in the hands of as many people as we thought we could that could help us make a difference. And all these efforts have been put in, and MDOC and our state leadership have just continued to fail to fix the problem. And on release of this report, specifically, we had some very interesting comments, both in print and I believe on a radio interview with Commissioner Burl Cain, who, like I mentioned before, has just stepped into this role as of, I believe, the end of May 2020. He's former Louisiana Department of Corrections, famously having worked at Louisiana State Penitentiary, or Angola. Many of us knew that. So tell me, you've seen Commissioner Cain's response to this report when he admits that he's seen it. What have you found as far as his responses?
It's very intriguing. It's very interesting because on one article I read, it stated, we are, really excited about getting Mississippi more, or MDOC more accessible. He understands the issues that disabled inmates are facing, and he's on track for those changes to, improve the facility. And then yet on another article I read that he said he hadn't saw the report. He has no knowledge. So there we have it.
And I think my favorite was his new MDOC. He believes that he will have it up and going and fully accessible by July, I think is his, which is a very interesting timeline we have not seen put into motion as of today, February 10th, 2021. And it kind of reminds me of a quote. I actually read a quote. It's by Albert Einstein. It's, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." So I guess my fear, having seen what Commissioner Cain did in Louisiana, is that we are literally trying to fight fire with gasoline. We are using the same type of thought process we had to get here to try and fix it, and what I believe we'll find is utter failure when we can get them motivated to even discuss this problem. That's been step one, is getting them to actually put this on the table as a topic, much less come up with innovative ways to fix the problem. So it seems that Mississippi leadership is tackling this problem much like they tackle all the problems, very ineffectively. And spoiler alert, it's just not going to work. So in our report, you had a really great conclusion. What is it, after monitoring for over a year and a half and doing this report and presenting this data to leadership and the Mississippi legislature and others, what's your idea on how we move the ball forward?
The first thing will be dedicated to medical and mental health care. I just feel like those offenders deserve better and more, and they're entitled to better health care. We definitely need to see more staff in the facilities as well. Understaffing has been about half the issue. There are far more offenders than there are staff to, make the facility run more effectively. We would really like to see a more accessible MDOC. We want to see all of those barriers removed. They're pretty much don't allow offenders who are physically handicapped to move about freely. We definitely want to see more assistant devices or medical devices for those offenders that need them. We definitely want to see more policies and procedures that are dedicated towards not allowing discrimination against offenders with disabilities. And then we would like to see an ADA coordinator at each facility, just to make sure that those offenders who are physically and mentally handicapped are receiving the things that they need, that they have a voice to speak to at the facility, who will say, hey, we need this, and they listen to her because she's at the facility. Mm-hmm. I think they would take it better if it came from her at the facility rather us.
Right. Because
we have one common goal, right? And that's just to make sure that disabled offenders are receiving the requisite care.
Mm-hmm. Great. And, there's probably an argument that we need to just throw in the towel with parchment and close it down. So I'll make that argument another day. But it's definitely a strong one and should probably be considered. So thank you, Kendra, for coming. the 5 feet from your office to talk with us about this report. We really appreciate it. You did an excellent job. We're going to end on that note, but the conversation about our prison work and the subject will continue into the next few episodes. There's a lot more to cover, a lot more to discuss. So don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review for today's episode. That way you get alerts when we drop a new episode. This is an important conversation, and we invite anyone from state leadership or the legislature that wishes to address this or talk about the report. We would love to talk to them either on or off the podcast. So definitely want to extend that invitation, and make sure to follow Disability Rights Mississippi on Twitter and Facebook so you can stay up to date on our latest work, not just our prison work, but everything that we work on as the Protection and Advocacy Agency for the state of Mississippi. And until next time, this is Greta Martin with Disability Rights Mississippi, and we are just getting started.